Hi, everybody. I'm Deepti, co-founder and CEO of Kodo, the most loved corporate card for startups in India. I'm super excited to launch Hold My Chai. And our first guest is the indomitable Justin Khan. He is a rock star serial entrepreneur and now a Silicon Valley VC. Justin runs Goat Capital, which is an early stage VC fund. And prior to Goat, Justin was a YC partner and built many businesses, the most epic of them being Twitch, that he sold to Amazon for about $1 billion. So Justin, great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So we'll go back in time a bit, and you were at Yale, which is one of the most intellectually elite universities in the world. And soon thereafter, after graduating from there, in 2006, this is much before even iPhone was launched, you told your friends, hold my chai. I'm going to conquer the world by strapping a camera on my head and streaming my life 24/7. What were you thinking?
Well, that was so actually when I was at Yale, which I was a graduate in 2005, I got into startups first because I started a different company with my co-founder, who became my Twitch co-founder, my friend Emmett, and I started a company that was kind of like Google Calendar. So it was like a calendar, like an online web calendar before there was really any other options, right? There was no Google Calendar yet. So we created this, we saw Gmail come out, we created this calendar, and then we luckily got funding from Y Combinator, from the very first batch of Y Combinator. And that's how we got started with startups. And you know, so it was a much more reasonable idea than Justin TV. So we started that. The long story short is, like, in the year that we got funded and built it, Google Calendar came out, and it was much better product than what we'd built. And so we ended up kind of like doing this fire. So we almost sold the company to Yahoo at some point, which was still a company back then. And then we ended up fire selling it on eBay in this like last ditch Hail Mary, because we didn't know what to do with it. And so after that was like a whole year. And then we were like, okay, well, the startup thing's not as bad as we thought. Let's start another company. And then at that point I was like, okay, hold my chai. I have this idea, which is to create my own live stream of my life to the internet by strapping this camera to my head. We had no idea how to technically do it. And from there we launched Justin TV, which was, I mean, the reason, like, it sounds like a really silly idea, right? Like now, maybe it doesn't sound as silly actually today in the world of social media, but back then it sounded very silly and people thought it was like kind of stupid. But I think my core insight was that people follow other people and they're interested in other people. And so if you give people a window into other people's lives through media, then that would be something, that people would be interested in it, which I think was right, because like social media proceeded to happen. There's no Instagram at that time, but like now, with like stories and social media, people really like are interested in other people.
You kind of caught that wave like probably 15 years before all of us got onto it.
So, yeah, I think it was like 7 years too early.
7 years too early. But it's quite a rage then as well, I guess, right? And I guess logically, how would you stream? I mean, I guess you were carrying something in your backpack, and that was your, and that's how you were streaming while you were walking around the streets with the camera.
Yeah, it was hard to build it actually. So it was a technical challenge to build it. We ended up building a camera that was like a computer that took a webcam, or like a webcam, and then turned it into a stream locally, and then sent it over multiple different cell phone modems, because the individual modems were like, cell phone connections were like pretty slow. Yep. So we multiplexed it over multiple modems and then reassembled it on the back end, and then sent that out as a stream to like everybody who was watching. And there was Flash Media Server. There wasn't very good internet streaming yet. So we, there was no HLS, there was no Flash Media Server had just come out with live streaming. So we ended up building our own kind of Flash Media Server or competitor to make it work. So it was quite a bit of a technical challenge actually. But we eventually got it to work, and then we launched the show, and people immediately came because it was kind of novel. And then they were like, your show sucks. You know, it was like me and my co-founders like programming the website. It wasn't very interesting. And so um, eventually they luckily they told us like, oh, I want to create my own content too. Like, how are you doing this? How are you doing a live stream on the internet? And so that's when the light bulb kind of went off and we created a platform. We turned Justin TV into a platform for anyone to broadcast live video.
Interesting. And, you know, like one of the things I want to touch upon in this conversation is that you've done so many different things and there are so many points of various decisions that you took. So we want to kind of get into your head and understand how you took those decisions. And those are inevitable crossroads that every startup faces. So one of the things was you pivoted from Justin TV, where you could stream anything, to focusing only on gamers, and that evolved into Twitch. So how did that transition happen? What was going on? How did you decide that?
Yeah, so we had Justin TV and it like grew for a couple of years and we raised like $7 million, and which was a lot at the time. And we scaled this website. It was like a top maybe 250 website in the world, and around live streaming. But the problem is it stopped growing, and we didn't really understand why. But we understood that the internet's growing, and if something's not growing on the internet, then you're shrinking relatively. So like that's bad. So we kind of went back to the drawing board, and my co-founder Emmett really was the one who pushed us to focus on gaming because that was like the only content that he liked on the site. And StarCraft 2 had just come out, which is a big game that people like to watch. And so we, you know, kind of sat around as co-founders and debated it, which is how we made most decisions, which is not really a great way to make decisions. I mean, it turned out to be okay in this instance, but you know, a lot of our company was run by like these like co-founder debates, and we decided that we would try gaming along with this other project. And then the gaming stuff kind of worked because we started talking to the customers, the gaming streamers, and we said, why are you doing this? What do you want? Why do you like doing this? And like, what will be, how could we make this better for you? And they wanted a couple of things, but they primarily wanted more fans, love, is what we called it. And then they wanted money, right? They wanted to make money doing it and be able to be professional. And so we just focused on giving them those things. And from there, the site kind of started growing. It was back in 2011. So 10 years ago, actually, we just celebrated the 10th anniversary this year. And then it started growing from there. And now, you know, then like a couple of years later, it was like pretty big website. And we ended up selling it to Amazon.
That's amazing. So the lesson for us to take away from this is that, if you're on the internet and the internet's obviously growing, and if your main products is not scaling at the same or growing at the same rate, then you got to look deeper into your metrics, your numbers, and see which is that one segment that seems to be taking off. And then once
the interesting thing is that segment was not taking off until we focused on it. So it was more like that part was intuition. You know, I think there's a lesson that's like, you have to do what you think. There has to be like, you know, you have to have the impetus to build that product because, and in this case, it's because Emmett really loved it. And there's a little bit of faith there. That's the first thing that's kind of necessary. And then, you know, if it's not growing, that's a problem. And then the third lesson is probably like, you need to talk to your customers, because we had never really talked to our customers before. We had just built like whatever we wanted. And then that was the first time that we really systematically talked to our customers and try to understand what they wanted. And the precursor step to that is probably like, you have to define your customers, because before we'd always said, oh, our customers are both viewers, people who are watching, and streamers, you know, people who are creating content. And at this point we said, no, our customers are only streamers. They're only the gaming streamers. Like the viewers will come wherever their content is, even if the experience is not that great. So we're saying like, we're going to only focus on the streamers, which I think sounds like very obvious now, but like at the time was not intuitive to us necessarily, because the streamers, like the viewers seemed like they were a much bigger part of the, you know, much bigger population, much bigger part of the site, you know? And so those were probably some of the takeaways that I would have. And then the last thing is that you mentioned was like, I'm interested in many different things. You know, since then I've started like many different companies. Some have worked, some have failed. A lot have failed, actually. I've invested in many different companies, from things that are like, you know, corporate cards, right, to like payment mechanisms, to like healthcare companies, to climate change companies, like over probably 200 companies now. And I've always just followed my interest. I'm someone who's very curious about learning about different ideas and spaces and markets. And so to me, it's always been, entrepreneurship has always been like an intellectual exercise of like following my curiosity and like trying to discover, how things work. And then once I see maybe there's like some hole in the market or something that's like not being solved in like a way that where it could be solved in a different way, then that's when I'm, interested in creating a company around it or funding a company.
Yeah, you sound like one of those scientists that, okay, hey, let me try this and see what happens. So it's kind of like you're curious about what's going to happen if you do X, Y, or Z and see what's the output going to be. And it's interesting you mentioned product market fit is one thing, but a founder market fit, right? So essentially that kind of led you to really focus on Twitch, because that's the Emmett understood or was close to the gaming community and kind of liked that and took it in that direction.
Yeah.
So that's great. And one of the things I want to also zero in on is the team dynamics. I think you've often spoken about in Justin TV and eventually Twitch. Tell us a bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah. What's funny is like, I think we ran things very dysfunctionally when we were in those early days, so I mean, I'm 38 now and I started startups when I was 22, right? In 2004. And so, back then I had like no work experience and no like experience even working at a job, like a real job. I had internships or whatever, but I hadn't like actually reported to a job, professionally before. And I never did, because my first job out of college was being a startup founder. And so we had no idea how to like actually run a company or manage anyone or like run, even like make decisions, right, as a group. And so everything was like very much by consensus in those early days. And like we had 3 co-founders with Justin TV, 4 co-founders total with Justin TV and then Twitch. And we just decide things by like debating it. And there wasn't really like one person who was the CEO, my co-founder Michael was technically the CEO, but like he didn't like have the CEO power of like being like, this is our direction, this is our vision, this is what we're going to do, right? Like we all just kind of sat around and debated everything. And in a way that was like very toxic, because it was kind of like whatever got decided was based on like attrition, basically. It's like whoever would like last the longest in these debates. But in another way, it like actually did create an environment where like people, at least the 4 founders felt very empowered to like try different ideas, and so that it turned out like that obviously led to Twitch, which is the biggest outcome that I've had so far. And so, I think that I don't know what the lesson is, because later on I was like much more like knew how to run things, and I was more like in charge, like kind of a, it was more like a centrally planned business, right? And it didn't work as well. So
Got it.
I don't know what the lesson is there.
Well, I guess it can be dysfunctional. It can seem probably in that moment that it's dysfunctional because you're frustrated that you're not taking a decision and it's just going on and on and on and debating. But I guess eventually, given that everybody's a strong personality, I don't think anybody would just give in because, they're just kind of tired, right?
Actually, yeah. The lesson is probably that you should just work with really great people, right? Because at the end of the day, like no matter what management structure they fit into, like if the people are really great, and then that's like what's going to carry the company. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess that's the philosophy of YC, where you were a partner for a few years, and then eventually now to go as well. Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. My philosophy now with Goat is I want to work with people where when I see them, it puts a smile on my face. Like people who I'm inspired by, and so, that's a bar that's hard to.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's not that hard, but it's like a relatively high bar, I think, and I think it's important that you like define the type of people you want to work with, and that and stick to that.
That's interesting. So I'll now want to talk about a little bit about Atrium. That's a company you started after YC. What led you to start that? And tell us a bit about what happened there.
Yeah, so we sold Twitch, and then I worked at YC for a couple of years, investing in a lot of startups. Companies all over the world, companies like Razorpay, in India. I kind of was the first company I invested in India. I was like very interested in India then and now. And then I, there's this like part of me that started like when I first started my first startup. I was like telling Michael, I remember my co-founder, who's now the CEO of Y Combinator, it was like, well, if we just made $1 million, then we'd be set. Like, could you believe it? Like, that was like our dream. It was like, we can make $1 million in startups. And, obviously we kind of blew past that with Twitch and some of the other startups that we funded. But it wasn't enough. Like, your goals keep creeping, like it's all very easy to be like, like I bet with your startup, right? When you started off, like, well, if I just get some people to use this, it'd be really cool. And then like, it grows, and yeah, now you have, you're raising money at higher and higher valuations, and then the goal just like moves, right? The goalpost moves. That's human nature. And so for me, like, I had created this $1 billion startup, but then I looked around, and like a lot of my friends had companies that were way bigger and better. Well, maybe not better subjective, but like bigger and more valuable. And so like they were like Reddit and Dropbox and Airbnb. And I was like, man, what did I do? I'm not, I'm just as smart as these guys. I should be like, I should have a bigger company. And so I was very ego driven. And then I decided in a very mercenary way to work on legal services because I thought that would support a big company like that industry. And so I started this company called Atrium, which is basically like kind of like Compass for legal or something. You guys probably don't have Compass there, but like it's like a full stack law firm that was trying to use technology to improve the processes. There was not a good founder market fit, right? Like, I was a customer of legal services, but I don't really care that much about legal service. In fact, I hate everything to do with legal. And so I started the company because I thought it was a good business. And I thought I had like my intellectual curiosity created a bunch of, like I learned a bunch of things about the industry that I thought were broken and could be fixed, which I think are true, actually. I think I was like correct in the hypotheses, but like got bogged down in the implementation. And so then I started this company, raised a ton of money, like $75 million. And TLDR, it like didn't work. I failed because we failed to do things like define the customer segment properly and like narrow the scope enough to find product market fit. So then I shut it down, like, I guess it was a year and a half ago now, and returned. Yeah.
So that's my next question. How do you know it's time to shut down, right? There is so much content out there where it's about founders, being tenacious about their goal and sticking it out there and pivoting if required, and but just staying in the game, right? At what moment do you decide, I'm done with this?
Yeah, so that's a good question because I've done both, right? I've done both, like pivoted to Twitch and then shut down a company as well. So like, what was the difference? So I think that in the latter case, when we pivoted Twitch, we had 25 people, and we were making $10 million a year in revenue from Justin TV. So it was actually like it was just roughly break even. It was like not a terrible. We had like a platform that was like not terrible, and then we had a very small company. When I had Atrium, I had 180 people. And we had some ideas for pivots, but I didn't believe in them. Like, they had been generated by a kind of consensus where it was like, they were like startup ideas, kind of like ideas kind of in this, in the Kodo space, not like exactly, but more like, but ideas for like tools for startups. And I was just like, I don't believe that I wanted to believe it in a way because I wanted to keep the team. I loved my team. I was like, we should work together. But then like, I didn't, if I put my investor hat on, I was like, I don't believe in this at all. And so it just didn't make sense to do something you don't believe in. And then the reason I even pivoted away from, like, the interesting thing was, like, with Atrium, we were actually generating revenue. We were probably about 15 million in revenue when we shut down because the margins were like negative. And I really sat, and we had money in the bank. We had like 25 mil or something like that. And I sat there and I was like, I wouldn't invest my own money in this company. And so, like, because I didn't see a way to make the margins work, like, actually with providing what we were doing. And so I was like, this is a bad business. It's not a venture backable business. And so we'd done this experiment to discover that. and we had tried for like 9 months or whatever to like fix the margins with all these things, and like basically didn't move the needle. And so I was like, there's no, like, I don't believe in this. Like, it's not like I wouldn't invest my own money in it. And if I wouldn't invest my own money in it, then why would I burn like $25 million of other people's money doing this? So to me, that was why, like, we shut down. And then in terms of pivoting, it was like the ship was too big. Like, we had too many people, and it was too much like a big company to make it work. And people were concerned more about preserving people's jobs and like finding things for people to do than actually finding like product market fit. And so for me, I was like, this is not a good way to figure this out, So I think the problem was like I scaled the team too big to like I scaled the team way too big for the product market fit that we had.
Got it. And it takes a lot of self-awareness to detach yourself from where you're so heavily invested in and say, okay, this is not working. And I guess being a YC partner before that, maybe did that help you kind of be able to arrive at that decision?
Well, I did think, I mean, I think that helped in terms of like the business side. Like, I think there was probably like a bunch of business factors that helped me, and then personal factors, right? The business ones were like, I had a lot of business model experience and had watched a lot of companies and like kind of, had some inkling of what a good business was and what a terrible business was, right? And so like, I was like, oh, my business is not good. It's like a low margin business. It's like a lot of custom work for every customer. And like there's high variance among customer satisfaction because there are different expectations around what the product should be, And so those were some of the things that I was like red flags. And then personally, I was like, oh, I'm, like, I am not that into this building this thing. It's like I'm building this thing that like I don't think is gonna work. And I didn't it's like it just I felt enough. I was able to disconnect my ego from that business, and be like, what would I do? What's like the what do I think objectively? Not just like I want to have this company exist,
Got it. Great. And then now we are on to Goat Capital. And tell us about the fund. What is it that you like to invest in? And I see that you're investing more and more in India as well. What is it that attracts you to India?
Yeah. So Go Capital is an early stage fund. I have with my partner Robin Chan, who was an early investor in Uber, Square, Xiaomi, and Twitter. And Robin and I have been friends since back in the Justin TV days. When he was at Verizon, he was running their data business, and I went and asked him for free data because it was so expensive to do this like mobile bandwidth, and he didn't give it to me. But we became friends anyways somehow. And so Robin and I just started. We've been investing together. I've been an angel investor in like over a couple hundred companies, and Robin has invested a lot as well. And we started doing some investments together, and then just really like working together. So about a year ago, we decided to create some structure around it and partnered up. And we're investing in a bunch of different areas. Really interested in climate change, fintech, healthcare, robotics and AI, just things that are interesting to us where we see there's like white space. And then, one of the big interest areas for us is companies in India. Robin has a lot of experience watching companies in China and helping companies in China for the last decade and a half. And I think, we're kind of undergoing this internet transformation in India that is similar to what China had gone through in the last decade. And so obviously there's a lot of potential, disruption and wealth creation there. And so we're pretty interested. I invest in Razorpay, like I mentioned earlier, and really saw, like, I had this hypothesis early on, like 6 years ago. And I was like, there's going to be Stripe. Payments is a local business because there's a bunch of like regulatory nuance. And so I want to invest. And I know that like people are going to need digital payments in every country in the world because the e-commerce revolution is happening everywhere. And so I want to like invest in all the like digital payments companies. And so found, Razorpay was one of them. I invested in this company called Zendit in Southeast Asia, this company called Paystack in Africa that got bought by Stripe. And so it was the first time that I really had like a global hypothesis, and then I think I was right. And I mean, it seems pretty obvious in retrospect, actually. But I went and did the work to like go find these companies and get them into Y Combinator or whatever. So um, then like I think with India we see like there's this huge transformation happening, and it doesn't. There's going to be innovations that are like Indian specific, but there's also like a lot of companies that it's just like this is a company, an idea that kind of works, a model that works in the West, and like it's pretty obvious that people are going to want it, right?
Yeah.
So fintech has a lot of those. Like your company is particularly interesting because it's like, yeah, people want corporate cards. Like that's very clear. I'm an investor in this company called Ramp, and there's obviously Brex and Y Combinator, the two amazing unicorn companies that are like, have done that model in the West. And so, we think it's going to be big in India. I'm invested in this company called Bueno Finance that's doing, a credit application on UPI because people want the world, and UPI is creating infrastructure to provide to run payments. And so, like to me, that's like it's kind of an obvious play. And then we invested in this company called Walrus, which is a neobank in India for Gen Z, right? And there's companies like that in the West that have worked really well. So just really interested in the Indian market. Oh, the other thing is that's interesting to me is companies in India that are operating as selling to the foreign markets, right? So there's a company called Chatwoot, which is it's kind of like Zendesk, open source Zendesk, open source communications platform for companies. And there's analogs to that, like a GitLab was to GitHub or Mattermost for Slack. And so to me, there's India's also a talent market that is, can target the West and other regions, just like companies in China have started to do that as well. Except I think actually the cultural difference is probably like less in India to the rest of the world versus China, the rest of the world. So yeah, that was a long answer, but that's kind of what I'm interested in right now.
That's super helpful. Yeah, so Buena Finance and Chatwood were in my batch in YC, Winter 21.
Mm-hmm.
I think Walrus is the current summer 21. So yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the questions we got from our audience is that, you would be getting a lot of pitches everywhere across different channels, be it your email, your LinkedIn messages, your Twitter DM, all of that. How does one surface up into your shine amongst like all the stuff you get coming at you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I do respond to cold inquiries. I mean, right now I'm like ever since I started making YouTube videos, now the like volume has like 10x. So it's tough. I mean, I think the best way is actually like to get an intro from like a founder that I invested in already, because I do like read every single one of those, and for the most part I will like talk to every one of those companies.
Okay.
Which is now I've shifted the burden of my inbox onto you. But yeah, like I do respond to cold inquiries, probably more than most people, like quite a bit. It's just at this current moment I'm a little backlogged, but yeah. I mean, you never know when someone where the next great company is going to come from, right? Like I remember I got introduced to the investors that invested in Justin TV, which turned to Twitch. So they made like their whole fund off that investment. They found there was a mutual friend who was like a founder of who was like just like, I want to introduce you to my investors because they're great. And so if like you got to pay attention to like every all the different inbound, right? Because you never know when the next unicorn company is going to come from.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the audience out there, if you want to reach out to surface up in Justin's mailbox, please feel free to send over your pitches to me. I'll send it to him. And
that's a good trade, and then maybe that they can become a Kodo customer. That's like that'll be the trade, right? Like become a Kodo customer, and then DG will review your pitch and or your deck, and then potentially send it to me.
Yes, it's a Kodo Club benefit for whoever.
Yes. Yeah.
So great. All right. So that kind of takes us into our next section, which is a masterclass section where we talk about one topic where, our guest is very strong at and help our audience learn a bit about it. So since you're a VC who's also a prolific content creator on YouTube and you just post so much content out there on LinkedIn and Twitter, et cetera, we'd like to understand a bit more about the creator economy. That's something that is very popular these days. So, you have a core concept that people follow people, and which is what inspired you start Justin TV as well. Would you like to elaborate a bit more on that as to how to think about that concept?
Yeah. So like 15 years ago, right, there was no social media. And there were celebrities, and you could see that people were very interested in celebrities, even beyond the scope of whatever they were famous for, right? Like, they were interested in musicians' personal lives or whatever, right? Like, and what they were doing, where they were living, going on vacation, and all this stuff, right? And so the social media has just expanded the scope of who can be in the spotlight to like everybody. And right. And so you can see the lives of your friends. You can see the lives of people who are like micro celebrities, like myself, maybe like somebody who's like not actually that famous, but is like locally, maybe locally more famous in a specific vertical, in a specific space, right? Like tech, right? Tech investing and startups. And so I think that has really influenced and changed how people make decisions and like learn how, like a lot, it's like very subtle, but like people don't think about this, but it's like really changed how people learn things, how people like learn about products, and how people make purchasing decisions. So before, right, like 15 years ago, to learn about, or to learn something, you would like go to the news. To learn about a product, you would like hear about it from advertising, maybe, or because you saw it on like a show, like the Today Show or something like that, right? Like highlighting this product, or like some on TV. You would make a purchasing decision because you were convinced from this ad, right? And I think now more and more, it's not obviously those mechanisms still exist, but more and more, like we do all these things because someone we see like tells us about them, right? So they tell us about something that's happening, some current event, or they have an opinion on it in social media. And then we learn about a product because we learn about a product because it's like we see someone using it who's on social media, or when we buy something, make a decision because someone recommends something to us on social media. And so I think influence through these different channels, which is what social media is like this tremendously undervalued and very powerful way to reach people, right? And because human beings are mimetic, and we tend to copy other human beings, right? Like we're like very social animals. And so I think that's something that's like, we're just seeing how that changes the world, right? Like play out right now. And the consequence of that, I think, is that influencers are relatively undervalued as a channel today than they ever have been. And I think that's changing like very quickly in the last like 2 years. But, more and more people are seeing like, in the US, we had like Charlie D'Amelio, right? And she like launched this partnership with Dunkin' Donuts. And that's like to make like a Charlie coffee or something. I don't even know. I don't drink it, but like that is like one of I think it's our fastest selling product ever. Right. And what is it? I mean, it's just different coffee. Right. And so, people are starting to wise up to like, wow, these are like really valuable partnerships, right? If we can get an influencer on board to like be the face of our product and recommend our product, that's how people make buying decisions now. And so that's a very, very valuable. And I think every company is going to have to think about that strategy, and I think that started with consumer, but it actually will be like B2B eventually, right? Like, because you'll have these like business influencers, like, maybe it's like myself or Gary Tan or something. Or probably people who are much better and bigger than us, right? There's, already maybe like some of the Shark Tank people or something like that, or like, but there's going to be more, and you're going to have sales influencers and like customer service influencers, like people like on every, all these things where you wouldn't think of it at first, right? And I think that, for me, I can just see it already, like how it pays dividends in my business, right? Which is like, if I create content online that people like, and they get value from, they prefer to have me as an investor. And there's lots of capital. They can make choices to like have many different people as their investors. Like you could have decided to have any person as your investor, right? Like your round was very popular. And so, part of your decision is like, how do I like this person? Do I know them? Do I feel like they're going to be helpful? And effectively, all the content that I create is marketing to have you come to some sort of like conclusion at the end of the sales funnel, right?
Yeah, I was
It's
like,
like,
since investing, yeah, I mean, what else could I ask for, right? So yeah, it was,
yeah.
yeah.
And so I think that's really, I think there's this opportunity for every company, whether it's like a B2B company, B2C company. You know, the B2C ones are probably more obvious today, but like to use influencers in this new kind of creator economy, or like the creator space world, whatever. Yeah, you know, in a different way to like drive sales and acquisition, you know. And I think that's an interesting area to think about, you know.
So one of the things that you mentioned is that identifying the influencers that are relevant to a startup's product and partnering with them to make your product popular. Is there something that startups can do to create content and become those influencers in a way?
Yeah, so I actually think some of the time it's not just finding external people and slapping them on your product. Some of the time it might be you becoming the person, right? So I advise this company. My friend is starting this company that's like a cannabis company, right?
Mhm.
You know, it's in America, in California, so it's legal. And so I'm like, hey, you should become the cannabis business influencer because you have this story, has like a personal story around it. Like I think is, you know, he's like it's a very like, the brand is called Country. It's like
Yeah.
it's kind of like a, you know, like an organic, homegrown, like a positive ethos cannabis brand. And you know, I'm like, if you showed behind the scenes of like what you were doing on the business side, like how you're building this business, and you kind of built the business in public, people would probably resonate with that, and that would attract some set of people to buy it from you, right? Because it would be authentic. And so, you know, there's another example of this actually would be a company called Buffer, which actually did this very early on. The guy, Joel, the founder of Buffer, did everything that they were, all their development was like in public. He like published all their salaries, and they published all their decision making, how they raised their Series A. All this stuff was like, you know, he did in blogs, right? It wasn't like video, but it was blogs, which is a form of, you know, creation. And I think that was very powerful for them to get customers and to get talent to join their company. And so like, you know, I was recommending and he became personality, right? He was the author, he's the content creator. I was recommending my friend Jamie from this Country brand that he invest, right, in becoming the face of it. And you know, I think Elon Musk is someone who's like done a really amazing job at that on Twitter, and leveraging the power of influence to have this rabid set of Tesla fans that's kept his stock price at this insanely high, so that he can have access to this capital, you know, in a way that the other car companies haven't been able to. And so you can see the examples of it all over the place. And I think a lot of people who have done it, you know, they've done it accidentally so far, or because it was their interest. And I think more and more people are going to go this path because they see the value in it, you know, the downstream value.
Yeah, and I think in India, one of the most popular examples is Kunal Shah. He's so active on Twitter and LinkedIn, and he creates amazing content and got amazing followers. So yeah, I think that's a great example of people following people and how a startup can leverage that concept. And it's
Oh,
a
the other thing I'll say, can I add one more thing? Is you know, a lot of people my partner Robin was like, hey, you should apply, you know, what you're doing on the social media side to Goat, like our Goat brand. And what I was like, no, it's not going to work, because like people don't want to follow brands anymore. Like you could just go and look at any brand, like even, you know, famous heritage brands. Like I bet like Coca-Cola on Twitter or something. How many followers does that have? I bet it's like millions, right? And then, but then there's, you know, Elon Musk would have like 50 million, right? Like, you know, the brands, people are not interested in like brands anymore. They want authenticity, right? I don't want to see brand marketing. I want to see the people I care about doing things that are interesting. And so I think instead of trying to, like, a lot of companies might be like, oh, I'm going to build my brand. Well, no, maybe you should build yourself. And then, you know, you can market whatever thing is important to you.
Yeah, brand is built after a series of actions that a company takes across various functions. It's kind of, I mean, I don't know, I believe that it's kind of hard to create a brand in isolation and do everything else differently, especially in today's world where there's just like so much more transparency and people are just more vocal on social media and everywhere. So yeah, that's great. Build yourself, not your brand. Great, thanks for that. And then when, let's say, you're creating this content, how do you create it at such high frequency? Is there any interesting source of inspiration that's worked for you?
Yeah, well, I'm not too precious about it. I like, I'm able to, I say, oh, well, like if it's not perfect, that's okay. Like I'm just willing to put out like a lot of content, and some of it's going to be, oh, maybe people like it, maybe not. I'm just going to experiment, and I consider it all experiments. So for me, I like put out a YouTube video every week or two. I'm trying to do two a week. I put out, TikToks and tweets and all sorts of stuff. And I have like a lot of team members helping me. Like I have like a little social media team that helps me with my content, YouTube and stuff like that. But for the most part, it's like, I'm just like willing to like experiment, and I don't have that high of a bar, So like for the videos, if I do a video, I'll like turn on a camera, I'll just riff on a topic, and then at editing, like I have an editing team, they'll cut it down to be like, they'll throw away 50% of it, and then we'll just roll it out and see what happens. And some of them work, some of them don't work. I mean, I probably could grow faster and like have more fans or whatever and reach more people if I like put in more effort, but I'm kind of, I'm good with where it's at. So I guess for me, it's like having a low-ish standard, and then you want to find, content types that you can, or content like formats that you can crank over and over, So for me, like it's, at first it was like I would tell stories about, startup stories, and then I started like doing more, talking about different topics, like different startup topics or wellness topics. And then those are like formats that are really easy to make, or like I'll do like vlogs now where I like kind of show people what's going on in my life, like investing and traveling. And so, I just try to experiment with different formats that I can repeat.
Got it. Yeah. That's the one thing, let's say if a startup decides to do that, where, you're kind of putting yourself out there in an authentic way, how do you know how much is enough, how much time to put in, how much effort to put in? You got to start up to run. You got to fun to run.
Yeah. I think you should only do it if you like to do it, right? Like I wouldn't force yourself to do it. Like it's like doing sales, right? Some founders are going to love to do sales and talk to their customers. Other founders, they don't want to do sales. They want to work on a product. Other people are going to want to work on social media. Like you should just do what you love to do. I love to make content because I like storytelling. For me, it's like a form of storytelling. I turn on camera. I try to figure out, how can I tell the story in a high impact way? I record it. Maybe it is, maybe not. I get a lot of positive feedback from people. They say, hey, like people will recognize me now and say like, oh, Justin, you're like, really inspirational because, you talked about failing, and like not a lot of people will talk about that. Or you talked about, succeeding, and it was really inspiring to me, whatever. And I get a lot of positive feedback from that. I get a lot of joy from that, from hearing that from people. And so, because it feels like I'm helping people. And so it means a lot to me. And so I'm very excited to make more content. If you're not excited to do it, I wouldn't do it, right? Just go back to work and focus on your startup, right? Like fine, or maybe your co-founder wants to do it, like maybe someone else on your team, but like you should just do what you're really passionate about doing. I really believe that.
And what comes naturally and is authentic. That's
what's authentic to you, right? I think that's really important, because if you're not comfortable and you're not excited about it, people are not going to watch it because they can tell, like people can tell.
Great. So with that, I move to our next section, which is Agony Angel section, where some of our audience have sent us questions anonymously that they would like you to address. So there are two interesting questions that we got, which are kind of similar. So I'll take them both. One of them says, our main competitor uses aggressive growth hacks. Should we also try to beat them there, or rather focus on a product and messaging? A similar question is, what is the advice to startups who are in the constant race for growing MAUs and DAUs to keep the funding funnel open?
Well, okay. So, I mean, I think the answer to the former, I mean, if you think these aggressive growth hacks, I would do what's true to you, right? If you think these aggressive growth hacks are like, unethical or like not, like they're misleading, then I wouldn't like do that. I think working on a product is almost always the most important thing is like to have the best product. Because the best product doesn't always win, but it usually wins, right? Like there's some exceptions where like they had, your competitor has the most distribution and they have like this entrenched distribution or entrenched sales force, so they were able to like compete with you with an inferior product. That's true, that happens. But like for the most part, like in many situations, having the best product is like how the winner will ultimately be decided. And so I strongly encourage you to just spend time working on your product. Like with Atrium, made the mistake of like, I was like, oh, I just want to work on distribution because I think that's like the most important thing. And I built this like great sales and marketing and sales funnel, but the product was not good. And so the churn was high, So I just think that like, growth is important for sure, but having a product is like the prerequisite to growth. And so, there's this great tweet storm that my co-founder Emmett from Twitch tweeted out about what he had learned in 10 years of Justin TV and Twitch, or 10 years of Twitch. And that it had, there's a part about like the different mechanics of growth in there that I won't get into, but maybe you should look it up. For the other question, it's like, how do you keep the funding pipeline open? I mean, yeah, growing is like the best way to do that. Like, if you have growth, then like people are going to want to fund the business, right? So like I would focus on like having a great product that leads to growth, right? Like if you have a product that people like to use, then they're going to want to use it. It's going to grow, right? And then yeah, I mean, you can help that growth by experimenting with different channels and stuff like that. But then like, you got to grow for the most part, unless you're just an amazing fundraiser, but I wouldn't bank on that.
So I guess what we can take away from that is that you'll be able to fundraise as long as you have a strong growth, and strong growth comes from a strong product, and not to be tempted by aggressive, unethical growth hacks that always kind of bring the castle down later at some point in time, if you don't have product market fit and you're doing that.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Got it. Great. So now before we move on to our last section, which is a quick and dirty rapid fire section, we'll just take a few audience questions that we have gotten already. So there is one question who asked, talking about the team dynamics of Justin TV, that situation with multiple founders could also go south. How do you ensure it doesn't get toxic and people actually thrive off of each other's ideas?
I mean, it did get toxic for us for like a while, right? Like I think that, well, I mean, the biggest tip I can tell you is like in general, the life hack is like having self-awareness and letting go of your ego is like the most important thing. Wherever you are, if you're the boss, you're the employee, you're the co-founder, you're in your marriage, if you just let go of your ego, then you or work on seeing your ego operating and then letting go of it, your need for the world to be any kind of way in that moment, then you will be able to like, it's a superpower. Like I used to be very ego driven. So if someone said something that I didn't like because it was like challenging my idea, like let's say I'd have an idea and someone would be like, that's not a good idea. Immediately I'd be defensive because I'd be like, oh, this guy thinks I'm stupid, or he thinks my idea sucks. And like, that's threatening my feeling of security and safety and my status in this company. And I'm very like, I'm insecure about my position. So because I'm young, so I'm going to be like, no, I'm right. And I'm going to dig in. And that's like a high ego way to respond to that situation. Right. And instead, like what I've gotten to through a lot of meditation and a lot of self-work is that, so I say some idea and then they're like, that idea sucks. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I feel there's a sense that like, maybe I should, there's some sensation of like, oh, it's like, I don't like that, hearing that. And it's like, oh, why do I feel that way? And then I'm like, oh, I wonder why that person thinks the idea is bad. Like, is it because it is bad? Like, maybe so. Like, can I approach this with curiosity and like learn something from it? Like, him thinking my idea is bad, it says nothing about me. He doesn't know anything about me, right? Like truly, like what's inside. Like, you know, like it doesn't say anything. It's like not, doesn't have anything to do with me. He could think the idea is bad because the like idea is because he doesn't know, we haven't communicated it. Or he could think the idea is bad because it's actually bad. But if even if the idea is bad, it has nothing to do with who I am as a person or like the quality of my life. So, you know, like, and then I just can approach it with much more objective, like, oh, I wonder why he's saying that, and like just try to understand it more, right? And then maybe come to like a better um outcome at the end. But ultimately it's like the thing is like I'm not triggered by it, you know, anymore. And so the difference, you know, in the former case is like how I'd operate 10, 15 years ago, then I would, you know, like I would that would cause a lot of rifts and conflicts and, you know, arguments. And then now, like in my ability to operate from a place of like less ego, I'm just like, oh, this is, I just, it feels like I'm a much higher leverage way to interact with the world. You know, I'm not like constantly pulled by things anymore. It's like things just happen and that's okay.
Yeah, that's a very powerful position to be in, and that's constant endeavor for myself as well. Great. So moving on to the next question, we are seeing creator economy and crypto businesses grow synchronously. Can NFTs enable monetization ease for creators?
Yeah. So I think NFTs are pretty interesting, right? Because it's, we're starting to see a lot of different ways that they can, they're being bought and collected and valued for games and for, you know, creators. Like I launched my own YouTube videos as NFTs, and you know, I think that there are interesting applications for creators. I think, you know, for sure, like if you're a creator and you can market your NFTs, then that's like a great way to monetize. Um, so there's a lot of companies trying to help you with that. I don't know if anyone's really figured it out exactly yet, but I think that's an interesting space to watch.
Got it. Okay. And the last question that we're taking is, how do we make sure we're not burning investors' money? That is, maybe spending too much in marketing or product development is not the right thing to do. How do we know that? And how do we know what is the right strategy?
I mean, that's kind of too vague of a question for me to give you a really valuable answer on, but like, you know, I think you have to, like, okay, I would set a milestone. There's like some milestone you want to get to, right? Like it's either profitability or it's another milestone that's going to enable you to raise more money. And then you can back out what you need to do to get to there, right? Like, and then you need to have a buffer because things never go as planned. So you can tell, like, here's how much money I should spend to get to there, you know, assuming I need a 50% buffer or 30% buffer or whatever. And then that's like how you can tell how much money you can spend. And if you can't spend that amount of money to get to that milestone, then that's a problem, you know.
Moving to our last section, which is the quick and dirty rapid fire section. I'm going to throw a few questions at you, and whatever comes top of mind, let us know. Your favorite beverage?
LaCroix, the soda water.
And how many hours of sleep do you get?
Well, usually I try to get 8 hours of sleep. I didn't quite do that tonight, but
Yeah, I noticed your message on LinkedIn. I was like, I hope he's sleeping and will wake up in 5 minutes. Okay. Beach or mountain?
that's hard. Probably 50-50.
Texting or talking?
Texting.
What is the strangest thing you've ever eaten?
I don't know, raw horse. Call it basashi in Japan. That's probably it. Yeah.
If you knew you're about to die and your last meal can be anything you want, what would it be?
Oh man, there's so many good choices. I'd probably have an ice cream cake.
Ice cream cake. All right. After a raw horse, I guess you need that. Okay. If you could live anywhere in the universe, where would it be?
I'm in California. It's the best place in the universe.
And what are you more bullish on, startups or crypto?
In terms of financial outcomes, well, I don't know. I guess I'm more bullish in crypto right now. I have to choose between like traditional startups and crypto. I think there's a lot of opportunity in crypto right now.
Got it. Uh, what is an unusual source of inspiration for you?
There's this book called Shogun by James Clavell, which is a historical fiction novel about a British sailor marooned to Japan in feudal Japan in 1600. And I read that book and I get a lot of management and life tips from it.
All right. That's on my list now. Um, what's your biggest pet peeve?
I guess when people don't they're takers and they don't contribute. You know, like people, when the people don't contribute, I think that's probably it. But I, you know, even that, I kind of forgive people that.
What scares you?
It scares me. I think if my immediate family was to die before me, I think that would be that's probably my biggest fear.
What's the one superpower you wish everyone in the world had?
I wish everybody had more compassion. You know, was able to tap into that deep well of compassion that's intrinsic to the human experience. If I think that's a superpower, and if they were, that would make the world a much better place.
And my last question is, when are you coming to India?
Oh, I need to come to India. I've invested so much money in India, and I've never been. Which is like probably negligent. Yeah, as soon as travel opens up, I want to come to India. Rob and I are going to come for a couple of weeks.
Great, Justin, this was amazing. Thank you so much. Any last pieces of advice for our audience out there?
I'm excited with I think the opportunity in India is like the best opportunity in the world for startups right now. And so I think that like the people who are probably listening to this are building, are going to be building the next generation of companies that are going to be huge internet, giants, not just affecting India, but also affecting the rest of the world. And I think that's, I'm wishing people the best of luck on that journey.
Super. Thanks, Justin. And with that, we can't wait to host you for another session of Host My Chai in India when you're here on your next trip. So,
all right.
see you soon.
Amazing. See ya.
Thank you. Bye.